Hey, well, what's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, I cannot believe that the selection committee had the Chiefs in the playoff. They clearly weren't as good as their record said that they were. What a travesty. We deserve better.
Yeah, I mean, the AFC West has always been kind of a cupcake league. And I think that, when they face a real football team from Philadelphia, cold weather team, that's how this works, right?
Yeah, we really got to reevaluate how we go about this. If teams are just winning games on random last-second field goals, let's
Patrick Mahomes is washed, by the way. So I don't know why we were giving him the benefit of the doubt. It's kind of like a Jordan Travis situation.
Yeah, exactly like that. We should have just evaluated the Chiefs based on who they were in those 2 years and not necessarily held them to the same standard in 2025. You're right. Super Bowl. It did happen. We have a great show lined up, by the way. I've got some thoughts on Jalen Hurts that we'll get to in Lad of the Week because, spoiler alert, he is my Lad of the Week. Because there are a lot of choices for that, but we're going to get into all of that later on. I won't spoil yours, but Will, I got to confess something here. We got so deep into hot seat index stuff, I did. I'll say me. I got so into that I forgot that I promised the people a draft. So that's what we're going to do. Usually we're going to try and do those first Thursday of the month, but instead we are doing that today. We are drafting the non-quarterback Heismans for 2025. Who can win that? We are doing that because, hey, what do we just have? We just had a non-quarterback win the Heisman Trophy. Feels pretty relevant to do that. Will, we're going to go into how last year's draft played out, but you do feel like this is a worthwhile thing to do, right? Like we're not just wasting time and filling airtime in February by doing this.
No, yeah, especially with Travis Hunter. I mean, winning it, to your point. I think that a lot of this stuff, as we preview these teams, we start to look at, whose trajectory, okay, well, if we three, for instance, Colorado had two Heisman contenders, right? Obviously one was a quarterback, but it's well, those couple of guys were enough to make Colorado a good team. You know what I'm saying? So when you start to look up and down these rosters, you go, oh, wait a minute. This team actually does have 3 or 4 guys that I like. I'm going to start prepping and setting expectations there so that we look up in week 3 and we're not going, oh, wow, that guy's still around, huh?
It pays to do your homework with some of these guys. Yeah, you're exactly right. Look, 40% of the Heisman winners during the 2020s, non-quarterbacks. It's 2. Yeah, exactly. 3 of the last 10 non-quarterbacks. Okay, so it's not quite a trend, but think about it.
And see, now again, revisionist history, we get to ask: was Brock Bowers robbed? That's the real question.
I don't think he was. And I think because we tend to do this thing where we assume that postseason accomplishments should be accounted for at the time of voting and all that. And I would have had no problem with Brock getting a Heisman invite as the best tight end in college football history, but I don't think that it really set up for him in the way that some might have assumed. I'll just say that. But yeah, we're gonna do the way that we usually do these drafts for those who just started listening to us in season or something like that. We haven't done one of these in a bit. Will and I each draft 5 of whatever category we're talking about. And then we'll put this up to a vote. The Saturday Down South Twitter account at the SDS Pod. We will do voting there. The voting is really just to see how people felt about who won this. And there are certain ways in which we could determine a winner.
If someone wins the Heisman versus.
Exactly. Well, if someone wins the Heisman Trophy, we can determine a winner. So speaking of that, would you like to revisit our non-quarterback Heisman winners draft from last year?
Something tells me I don't have a choice, so I'm going to go ahead and say yes.
You're right, Will. You don't have a choice. Your 5 picks were Luther Burden III, Ollie Gordon II, Emeka Egbuka, Harold Perkins Jr., and Zachariah Branch.
This is maybe the worst thing I've ever done. That's not even the best wide receiver on Ohio State. That is so impressive. Harold Perkins, he got hurt on my team. I literally said to myself, I actually feel good enough about including a LSU player. Nothing could go horribly wrong here. Each and every one of these guys was a curse into themselves. I'm so sorry, everyone.
I was trying to think of who the best player was on that list at season's end. Ollie Gordon had a rough year.
He sure did.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't win a single conference game. He didn't hit the 1,000-yard mark. Luther Burden III ends up he got first team all SEC love. Some of that was a little bit reputation based, if we're being 100% honest. He didn't have the year that we thought he was capable of having. I think Burden ended up being Ibuka had a 1,000-yard season. Let's go.
Ibuka was the guy, yeah.
He just wasn't the best player at his own position at Ohio State, and some might argue he was actually the third best player, depending on how you feel about Tate. But yeah, it was rough for you. You won the vote, despite the fact that this was my 5. And we did this in August, by the way, so just before the season started. But my 5 picks for this: Travis Hunter, Caleb Downs, Donovan Edwards, woof, Trey Harris, Jaden Blue. I thought you cooked on this draft. I came away from this draft thinking I lost, knowing that I was not going to get the vote. And you definitely had that.
I think this was a rough day for both of us because there were 2 finalists who were not quarterbacks, and we didn't even draft the other guy.
I know, exactly. So really rough. It's a reminder. This is hard. That was in August. Right?
Yeah.
When all of the storylines are laid out, everybody's already read all the preseason content their brains can possibly handle. And I don't think we had glaring omissions based on preseason expectations. And it kind of speaks to the nature of the position at times. But yeah, I mean, my draft wasn't particularly good. Like I get to win the draft because I had Hunter, but like look at the rest of this. Caleb Downs had an awesome year. Maybe something that we'll talk about today. Didn't get top 10 in the Heisman. Didn't really sniff any sort of realistic campaign for that. Donovan Edwards was once again second fiddle in his own backfield by season's end. Trey Harris was awesome, was legitimately good, but of course missed a month of the season and did not end up having much of a case at season's end. And then Jaden Blue ends up being second fiddle in his own backfield to Trey Wisner because he dealt with the fumbling issues. Was a good player, but still wasn't someone that people were banging the drum for to win the Heisman Trophy. So
was Baxter already hurt by this point?
Baxter was hurt. Yes, Baxter was hurt. He had been hurt for 3. Yeah, he got hurt like 3 weeks earlier. Otherwise, he would have been my number 5.
I was gonna say, I was like, well, this actually might have been clairvoyant if Baxter was healthy, but if he was hurt, yeah,
no, he was already hurt at that point. So look, that is not a flex 5 right there. Is what I'm trying to say. And these will probably not age as well as we think they will. And I know that. I 100% know that. We could be talking about guys that go down in spring ball for all we know. Okay. So this has potential to be our worst of these drafts that we have ever had, despite the fact that a lot of these guys that we're going to talk about today, big time household names, all the accolades you could possibly have in the preseason. It is very, very hard for these guys, 18 to 22-year-old kids, to come back as household names in the sport and to be that good and to take it to the next level and to be considered perhaps the best player in all of college football. So that's the preamble for today. I think we should be looking at this not based on whether or not you have 5 guys that are all studs, because that's just not going to be the case. You kind of have to do some dart throws with this a little bit. But I think if one of your 5 guys finishes in the top 10 of Heisman voting, that's meeting expectations, right? If you have one of your guys getting to New York, I think that's crushing it based on how tough that's been for non-quarterbacks to be able to do that. And then I think if you have 2 of your guys that finish in the top 10 of the Heisman voting, that's an awesome draft. You absolutely nailed this. And to me, you would have a pretty clear argument to be declared the winner at the season's end. So,
makes sense.
Will, the ultimate question that I ask you before each and every one of these drafts: do you want first pick or second 2?
I'll take second 2.
Wow. Okay. I thought for sure you would take first pick.
And I have, a couple of times, but this is such a dart throw. I need more darts.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so I'll start obvious. Look, it's obvious. It has to be done. I'm taking Jeremiah Smith.
Okay.
I'll take Jeremiah Smith 1-1. And I think if you're struggling to comprehend why so many people are enamored with this guy, and I mean truly enamored in a way that I don't think we often get in college football to this level, at least with true freshmen. This guy was considered the best player on the field, or at least he was going into it. He was the most talked about player going into a national championship game as a true freshman. That is insane. like I don't really need to add to the argument of how good Jeremiah Smith is because you've already heard all of them. But even in a quiet game that he had in the national championship, he still delivered what was the most important play of the night. I mean, single coverage on the outside, boom. That's like you can't give that up to that guy. He's already doing things like that. And that is just unbelievably rare. His ability to step up in big time moments, that's going to be a big part of this case. Go back and watch the Oregon game and the things that he did to that poor defense. But you could look at it and go, hey, this is somebody that was just huge on money downs among all FBS players. He was second to T-Mac in third down receiving yards. Everyone looked back at that Tennessee game and laughed at Tennessee for ever thinking they could possibly defend him with single coverage and that it was this inevitable thing that he was going to go off. And I say that because I've talked before about all the respect I have for Jamon McCoy and the job that he did on him. And he made an All-American look like he was a walk-on. Yep. I mean, it was incredible to watch the things that guy did against awesome competition. The body control is already getting comps to Julio Jones. He led the nation in touchdowns on intermediate throws. He's not scheme dependent. I don't think anyone looked at what he did his true freshman season and saw it as some byproduct of having Chip Kelly as his OC or having Will Howard as his quarterback. If anything, people were like, those guys are holding him back. He should be even better. You know, he was that good. And given how much I think that was part of the end of season storyline for Ohio State, I think you could argue it's perhaps to Smith's benefit that their new OC is his receivers coach, Brian Hartline. You know, you don't have to tell him, get the ball to Jeremiah Smith, get the ball to 4, and you're going to have a more pass-happy attack, I think. And you're getting an extremely talented quarterback in Julian Sayin. Sorry, Alabama fans. He's going to be off doing great things probably for Ohio State this year, maybe winning a national championship. Who knows? But that guy is set to take over. If he's the second coming of C.J. Stroud, you're talking about someone that can make all the throws. Plus, and here's an underrated thing for the Heisman candidacy, having that guy opposite of you that can complement, that can just give defenses another reason to think. Carnell Tate, like having that guy still there is so important for Jeremiah Smith. He's a household name. His catches are going to feel louder. And if he has 1,500 yards pre-Heisman, I think he could have a legitimate shot.
Yes. And okay, I think there were 3 guys in tier 1 here. That was one of them. I don't even know if I would have taken him first, but it doesn't matter.
You wouldn't have taken Jeremiah Smith first. Oh, interesting.
I'm not sure that I would have. Okay. And for a couple of reasons. So I think that if you look at the trends in media, guys that peak that early, like in terms of guys that get recognition that early, it's so hard for them to continue it, right? Like usually when guys get better in their, like the following season, like they get there as a sophomore and they get better as a junior and then they leave. We often don't know what to do with guys that are good as freshmen. They usually are forced into a sophomore slump because people just get tired of hearing about them. And then they come back as juniors. And it's like, oh my gosh, this guy is, where'd he go? Nowhere. And so I think of these top 3 players, I think he's probably the best player. That's the thing. And I think that, but you throw in the Heartline wrinkle, that is a pretty interesting one because that's a guy who loves wide receivers. That's a guy who's going to feed him. Love the pick though. I think he's definitely a tier 1 guy. I just didn't want to like split the baby there. So these 2 guys aren't in any order. Like I said, it's all tier 1. So I'll just split it up and go with the other Jeremiah Love from Notre Dame. Yeah. Here I go talking about Mike Denbrock's run game again. I think that Notre Dame was a split backfield last year. They even did some pretty effective running with Riley Leonard. I think that Notre Dame has proven that they are, I mean, for the first time, people are rooting for Notre Dame, right? And if you look at the schedule is a little bit harder, coming up, but there's no one really insurmountable. There's really not a team at this point. When you're coming off from a national championship, there's only about 2 or 3 teams that you would say are a scary matchup for you. So I think that Notre Dame is going to, number 1, be the media darling for the first time in our lives. I think that this is a guy who could and should be their most effective player, maybe not their most famous player or the player that gets put on, all the marketing stuff, but he has enough of a name.
But how will he not with that name too?
Right.
Jeremiah Love, that guy's going to be all over the marketing.
Yeah. With the spelling of Jeremiah, Jeremiyah. Come on, man. That's a famous person name. So I think from a marketing standpoint, it all fits together where you have a little taste of him. That's what we like to do with the Heisman, get a little sampling, a little appetizer, and then say, well, he improved over this offseason. Where in reality, and let's talk about like C.J. McCollum on the Blazers, like his first or second year. It's like, did you get way better when you won most improved player, or did you just get more shots? Feels like this is going to be one of those situations.
Jeremiah Love is a phenomenal player who was not healthy in the playoff. Wasn't healthy
Yep.
post USC game. He had still the 98-yard touchdown against Indiana.
Yep.
He could still hurdle dudes left and right. He's got a hurdling problem. And he's an admitting hurdling junkie who has to tell himself when he's not healthy, I probably shouldn't do this, and then still does it anyways. He is so fun to watch and unbelievably explosive in a backfield that is going to have more rushing volume available now that Riley Leonard is off to the NFL. And we'll wait and see kind of what this offense looks like with Angeli, a guy that came in to that semifinal game and played a really important role for them. But I think they're going to give him at least 70% of the touches. And even though you got Price coming back, he's a guy that can covet a lot of volume. And their offensive line will. That's the other thing. They've made headlines because they're losing guys in the portal. That's because they're that deep. They might have the best returning offensive line in all of college football next year. And that's going to be a tremendous asset for him. I had him third on my board. Third on my board. I agree with you. I think that there is a pretty clear 1 through 3. And then there's kind of the drop off after that. So the more I think about this, the more you're probably right to take second too.
Yeah, and I think too, sometimes there'll be a guy kind of sitting there who ends up, in the Heisman, like there's like a good and evil, there's a struggle, whatever. Like we kind of saw that with like the McCarthy stuff with Michigan, how he was like the evil guy when he wasn't throwing the ball and they had the scandal going on. And like, so I think Love is just in a perfect position. Like nobody really, a lot of people don't hate Notre Dame anymore as hateable as they've been. And, I think it's a good story. So that's him.
Well, what's interesting too? You talk about like how the media narrative of Notre Dame has changed. Last Heisman finalist, Manti Te'o.
Yep.
2012.
Yep.
That's what we're talking about. The only 3 that they have had in the top 4 of the voting in the 21st century, and 2 times it was Brady Quinn.
Yep.
So that's it. Like they have not had those elite tier 1 guys. I think there's an Ian Book 9th place finish somewhere in there as well. Like Golden Tate finished 10 one of those years, but yeah, it has not been the place that it was obviously in the 20th century when it felt like there was just a lock. It was one of those set it and forget it. They're going to have at least one finalist, and Love has a chance to, now that the pendulum has swung that far the other way, now that Notre Dame is likable and people feel like they want to tune in to see a guy like that, I think he's a really good candidate. 60-1 odds on DraftKings, by the way.
Yeah, and a guy that I think is underratedly didn't live up to expectations at Notre Dame is Jimmy Clausen. That was a guy that was supposed to be so again, we're going into if they get a Heisman invite, look what Brian Kelly didn't do. And everyone loves that. So again, boom, that helps Love again. So okay, back to it. So again, Jeremiah Smith, I think better the best of these 3 players. But for the value, I'm taking Ryan Williams. And
so I already had Ryan Williams written down before you even said it. It's in the Iowa notepad, as you can see right here.
Yep.
That's how confident I was that he was coming off the board with this pick.
Yep. And I'll tell you for a couple of reasons. Number one, Alabama already has a wide receiver that has won the Heisman. So we start there. It is not breaking tradition. It's harder to win the Heisman as a quarterback, I would argue, at Alabama. It's like the only school, other than maybe Notre Dame statistically, that you could say that. Alabama, narrative-wise, just had a down year, objectively, right? Objectively, they just had a year where they didn't play up to expectations. So what people want to see is the comeback story, right? But Ryan Williams had the lion's share of targets. Ryan Williams had the experience. He had the name recognition. He had the big plays. And so whereas Jeremiah Smith just finished his feels like rookies. These guys are grown men. But he just finished his freshman season on top, right? Where it's like, oh my gosh, this is one of the best freshmen, maybe the best freshman wide receiver we've ever seen. How can he improve of this? So our lasting impression of Jeremiah Smith is going to be his playoff performance. With Ryan Williams, it's going to be losing to Michigan. You know what I'm saying? So you only have that to compare to, where it was like, where was this last year? What was here? But we are going to blame Jalen Milroe, or we're going to blame not having Ryan Grubb, or we're going to blame something like that. And again, he has already shown in his honestly undersized frame that he can handle this ridiculous target share. I haven't seen anything that suggests that Alabama is going to bring in some whale in the portal. That I didn't miss anything there, right? Like there's no 5-star that.
I wouldn't call Isaiah Horton from Miami a whale.
Yeah.
So to speak. Yeah.
No one's taking Ryan Williams' spot, basically. Like they're not getting, I don't know who that would even be, but like he was alone on a mountain by himself last year, even more so than Jeremiah Smith was, going to the point about playing with these other receivers at Ohio State. The story at Alabama needs to be that they can throw the football effectively, and they need to throw Jalen Milroe under the bus. Like structurally, for them to recruit, they need to be like, well, this wasn't our fault last year. this was Jalen Milroe. We just couldn't work with him. And so this next year, I think they're going to swing it all over the yard. I think they're going to completely change the offense with Ryan Grubb coming back. I think we're going to see close to what we saw at Washington with Adunze, and like the vertical passing offense, the spread, more of the spread, like less gimmicky style offense, because they're not going to need to accommodate and try to work in Milroe's legs. So I think that there's going to be this ridiculous comeback story on Ryan Williams when he would have been the greatest freshman receiver I think I've ever seen outside of Jeremiah Smith. And it was up in the air for most of the year, I think, until the playoffs came. Ryan Williams was just as good as Smith.
Down the stretch, really post Georgia, there were some numbers there that left you going, this isn't what I thought it would be. And I brought those up in the interview with Dunaway. After Georgia, 7 drops, 3 touchdown catches, 0 games with 90 receiving yards. How much of that is Jalen Milroe? How much of that is a true freshman that's getting obviously top billing on the scouting report, something that he's still going to have this year? And you could say like, hey, Jeremy Bernard, he's a nice player. They're going to have this guy. They're going to have that guy. It's still going to be about what Ryan Williams can do. And there's going to be obviously a redemption arc for him with the quarterback situation. You bring that up about having a new starting quarterback. It can actually work in Williams' favor in the same way that it did for Devontae, where Devontae was this established player by the time that Mac Jones was the starter.
Yep.
And so by that point,
and remember, Waddle was also technically like the number 1,
and then got hurt, and then it kind of opened up the door for Williams for Devontae to just take off that
comeback
year.
Story.
Yep. Yeah, big time. And so like with Williams, I think you could look at, well, why would he have a better case than his starting quarterback? If that's Ty Simpson, if that's Austin Mack, if that's Keelan Russell, like whoever that ends up being. And you could say, well, he's doing so much of the heavy lifting for this offense, and look what this offense has become, and it's maximizing his abilities. But yeah, he's an obvious choice here, even with the post Georgia kind of inconsistency that we saw. It is a slight bummer that we're not going to be able to say as of Sunday, Ryan Williams, 17-year-old. We've never seen an 18-year-old win the Heisman though, so that could work in his favor.
He was 17 for that long? Goodness. Like that's like one of the youngest players. Yeah. And yeah, that's going to be a fun one. And to answer your question further, like remember, freshmen barely get to talk to the media, especially at a place like Alabama. This is a guy who just has an infectious personality. Like he's social media famous. He was always doing stuff around campus. He had like the painted nails, say what you will about that. He was posting like the dog story after the Georgia game. So he's a guy that's able to generate headlines as a receiver and keep people on his side at Alabama, which is like pretty weird to do. It's rare that you see a guy who is not a defensive player or maybe like a quarterback get the amount of attention off the field that Ryan Williams did this year. And I think he can actually harness that to his own benefit this next year.
Yeah, the viral catches too. That's the other thing.
He's built for TikTok, dude. He's built for social media.
Got to be built for those highlight reel type clips and all that. That definitely helps for the non-quarterbacks. I think I'm going to take somebody that is... Do I take this guy now? Because I don't think you're going to take him. And by the way, we'll just go back and forth 1-1-1 for the rest of the way. I am going to go with, give me Desmond Reed.
Okay.
Give me Desmond Reed, the Pitt running back, who was not a guy that we have probably ever brought up on the show. I don't think I could say we've ever discussed, when would we have? Pitt didn't have a game against an SEC team this past year, didn't have the bowl game.
It would have been what was his name? Abedakanda that played Tennessee. It was 2 years ago.
Yeah, that guy was a stud.
Yeah.
He is someone who only has 1 year at the FBS level too. So that's part of this. He is going to become a household name if he's not already this offseason, because he's East Coast Cam Scadaboo. That's who this guy is. Not built like him, okay? You're not going to get them confused for one another. The Cam Scadaboo neck and head is unlike any other. So not saying from that standpoint, but he's one of these guys that if you just looked at the body of work and say, what does that guy do well? What does he bring to the offense? It is very Cam Scadaboo-like. Last year, he had 966 rushing yards after transferring from Western Carolina. People forget not just North and South Carolina, Western Carolina exists too.
And Eastern, come on now.
Yes, ECU as well. We don't sleep on the Pirates. He averaged 155 all-purpose yards, most of any returning player in all of college football going into 2025. Tied for the team high with 52 catches. He had a 10-catch game against Clemson, game which was obviously a very big turning point in their season. But the more I thought about the Cam Scadaboo comp, the more curious I was about his yards after contact as a receiver. That's so much of what makes Cam Skattebo just must-see TV. Is it's not just, oh, this guy's going to blow you over, beast mode, but like he can actually catch passes and do things to make you miss and to run right through you in the open field. Mm-hmm. Last year, Skattebo, he led all FBS running backs with 571 yards after contact on catches. Second in America. Did not know this until looking this up. It was Desmond Reed. 540 yards after contact on catches. Guy is built to be able to make people miss in the open field. He might have close to 300 scrimmage touches, plus he's going to get those opportunities as a punt returner. So those things always add to the non-quarterback Heisman path. If you're telling me that he doesn't have a chance because it's Pitt and they won't make the playoff, what do the last 3 Heisman winners do? Not play in the playoff.
Not make a playoff. There's only an issue for a couple. Anyway.
Yeah, so even in the expanded field, look, I think that's not necessarily going to be held against someone. I think he could follow the path of a certain ACC legend, Christian McCaffrey, and have a real case to win the award.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm with you there. Like, I think that for running backs, to our point earlier, you kind of need to see it. It needs to be that little bit of like a hurdle or like a yards after contact or like the Emmitt Smith style running back very rarely wins the award unless they have an overwhelming amount of stats that doesn't even really exist in college. Everybody just counts stats. So yeah, I'm definitely with you there.
Be honest, you didn't have Desmond Reed on your board.
No, I sure didn't.
All right. I could have taken him later, and it's going to make my board look a little bit weird, and that's why I almost opted against it. But I would have been very mad if I did not pick him up because he's got one of those chances to rise on the the Heisman odds. I don't even think that he has Heisman odds on DraftKings. I might have picked him too early. I'm now realizing that.
No, it's all good. Actually, I'm gonna, in the spirit of that, kind of do the inverse because I like this guy, but I think you're gonna draft him, so I'm gonna draft him here. But the next guy that I don't think you're gonna draft, I actually like better. That's my hint. Okay. So the big team that nobody has talked about yet is obviously Penn State. And while I don't imagine them, finding another orc under some type of a hidden mountain, pulling some kind of a sword out to get that beast on their side. So we got to go with the guys that they brought. And the guys that they brought were 2 great running backs last year, but I'm going to kind of focus in on Nick Singleton. I think that, Penn State has proven, like we talked about, they're not really going to air the ball out a ton. I think this has always been a ground and pound, low risk offense, after our boy Joe Moorhead left. And we're Joe Moorhead respecters, a little bit more on that later on the pod. But I think that given that this team has already had the precedent that, look, this team has now been competing for a national title about every other year under James Franklin. And as much as we hate to credit the guy, I think that now they're starting to get that amount of love. They're starting to get the preseason buzz. And so Singleton obviously has had his moments in big spots. I think he is a guy that they trust near the goal line. They already have. And so it feels like Allen is more of like a kind of 20-20 runner, where Singleton is going to both get you those goal line touches, which he's been, 12 touchdowns over the past 3 years. He's been that consistent that if you want to look at kind of the old school Heisman thinking, give the guy kind of the achievement award, the service award, I think is a very safe pick here.
Yeah, the 2 things working against him besides the timeshare, which if Katron Allen got hurt, like I'm not saying I'm rooting for that.
We'd be there.
I'm not saying I'm rooting for that, but Drew Aller is going to have a lot of conversation related to the Heisman, understandably so, despite the fact that his finish was not particularly good, but he's going to be considered one of the top returning quarterbacks in the sport. So you work against that a little bit.
But I think he also spoiled, like with the whole boat controversy, the way he played in that final game. I think people are almost kind of out on him, even though I like him a lot more than a lot of people. I think that his arm has a lot to like. But I think that, with that offense and the kind of sting coming off of that game, I almost feel like Aller's boat has sailed too.
True. Saquon didn't get an invite.
Yeah.
At any point. It's tough. It's really hard. If you're going to do great things as a running back at Penn State, go ask Miles Sanders. You're going to be compared to Saquon now. That's the new standard. So it's almost not even about his own backfield, because I thought about
poor Miles Sanders, by the way. He's been compared to Saquon twice now. He can't leave that guy's shadow.
I know. And I always used to bring up the story. Like, I remember talking to Miles Sanders at the 2015 Under Armour All-America game. And at the majority of the conversation was, so you're going there and you're going to back up Saquon for 2 years. Like, because Saquon was taken off as a true freshman. Yeah. And he had left the door open about flipping to Michigan State.
Mhm.
And he had some sort of comment, I remember that year. This is totally unrelated to the draft. I'm getting really sidetracked. But he had some sort of comment that said, you never know, just in case stuff happens. And
Mhm.
the stuff happens was in case James Franklin gets fired. And then he very promptly, definitely, without a doubt, got a call from Penn State once that story hit.
Mhm.
And he was asked, like, what in the world are we doing? And then he came out, I think he had like some sort of a tweet a day later, I
Yeah.
want to say, confirming his commitment to Penn State. And it was
The
one of those where
Stanford
it's
got the
like,
Coke can in front of the background, like we're best friends, guys.
yeah, but Miles Sanders still in the NFL,
Yeah.
getting professional paychecks. But yeah, look, great player and a household name. That's kind of everybody on this list of non-quarterbacks has huge potential roadblocks. So I don't point that out to say that he's the only one that has one, but yeah, Singleton becoming the best running back in college football and maybe getting consideration that way. I think that's definitely on the table for him. Let's go with Colin Simmons.
Man.
I love who he was as a freshman
Mm-hmm.
in a ridiculously talented PK-led Texas defense.
Mm-hmm.
He was every bit the 5-star that he was billed to be. And I thought the amount of times that he just jumped off the screen as an 18-year-old in this league was remarkable. I mean, you just do not see it very often. He had 14 TFLs and 9 sacks. That would be good for a pre-draft guy, much less a true freshman. PFF had him for 14 quarterback hits. The only 4 power conference edge guys with more are off to the NFL. That's good company, really good company. I'm always going to come back to how absurd it is that Will Anderson didn't get a Heisman invite in 21 when he basically just rewrote every record book possible. And he didn't get a Heisman invite because Aiden Hutchinson did. And people are like, why do I need to put 2 defensive players this high on my ballot? Guys, that was a year before I got a vote. I couldn't do anything to change that. I promise I would have.
And now look, we got it all figured out. We got a defensive guy partially winning the Heisman.
Exactly. So look, it's certainly possible. And I think it's also worth remembering that the same amount of running backs who have earned a Heisman invite in the last 9 years post Derrick Henry Heisman, like that's the amount of edge guys that we've seen be able to get there. So it's going to be natural to default to running back and say that's got the most opportunity for it. But still, there is, I think, a deeper understanding of what that position covets. And we have more ways to be able to say, are you really good at this? And are you dominating these matchups? But I think unlike someone like Dylan Stewart, who I considered for this, the South Carolina true freshman edge, who's going to be in a lot of these same conversations as Colin Simmons, so many of Stewart's surrounding pieces are off to the NFL. And Simmons, you're looking up going, that's a guy that's going to continue to benefit from his surroundings because Texas in that front 7 alone brings back Moore. They bring back Burke. They bring back LaFau, Hill. All those guys are back. And while I would still make the case that if I'm picking who the best players are right now, Anthony Hill Jr., Michael Taft, those are probably 2 better overall players in that Texas defense. But a game-wrecking defensive end just has a better path to New York than a safety or an inside linebacker, if I'm being honest. So for a Texas team that's obviously going to have all eyes on Arch, there is definitely a world in which Arch could be somewhat underwhelming statistically because this defense is so good. And Simmons is kind of the must-see guy for the nation's top defense. Or maybe Arch gets hurt or something like that. And it opens up the door and people are looking at Texas going, we got to reward this star power.
For sure. Do you think that, like we just talked about CJ Baxter, do you think that his train has kind of left the station? Do you think that's enough of a timeshare?
I think it's a timeshare. I think it's a timeshare because Wisner showed a lot to those Texas coaches. And typically Sark hasn't been one to turn his back on these guys. You know, and a lot of the times his running backs in the last four years have been guys who are off to the NFL. And so it hasn't been about who are they going to be as returners, but you play your way out of Sark's rotation if you do the Jaden Blue thing of fumble the football. And I think that you're going to have a lot of trust in Wisner. I still think Baxter is going to be awesome.
Yeah,
but that's why I don't have a Texas running back on the top 10, my top 10 here that I came up with. Oh, I definitely had a brief moment where I thought, do we run it back on CJ Baxter? Do we go back with some of those preseason expectations? Probably the emergence of Wisner would prevent my optimism on that.
Yeah, I think that Texas is a great place to start with defense. I think, and here's the funny thing: Arch Manning is obviously ineligible for this contest, but logic would suggest he will be there, right?
Yeah.
Based on just like Texas and everything that we've seen, it would be a disaster if he wasn't, and then none of these guys would be here. So therefore, that would mean that you would be in the exact situation you just talked about with Bryce Young and Will Anderson, where if Simmons is awesome, it would almost be taking votes away from his teammate. But yeah, I mean, I think that maybe Texas is this scrappy defensive team. That's why I asked about Baxter. And maybe the offense does struggle a little bit and it becomes like that's the story, you know?
Is there too high of expectations for Arch this year? And is it perhaps a little bit more of a scrutinized candidate than we would think going into the season? Are we evaluating him based on numbers that other quarterbacks in the country are putting up? Are we evaluating him based on what his very famous uncles put up in their junior seasons? Are we looking at it through that lens? Because that would be something that opens up the path for Simmons, just within that roster. But yeah, Arch is obviously going to be part of this conversation, preseason Heisman favorite, and someone that is going to be so much more dissected. But if you're looking at him and kind of opening yourself up to the idea of a Heisman candidate coming from Texas, I think Simmons is going to have a really good case to do that, make all the viral plays, and be kind of that guy that you just can't help but watch.
I love him. He is just a vicious player. He's so fun to watch. So I love the selection there.
You are going to pick a defensive player now?
No, this is a guy I was talking about. I left myself a little open that you may take this guy. Maybe you have a different opinion of him than I do. I don't think it's as obvious by any means. Nate Frazier, Georgia running back. Is he on your list?
He was not. He was considered. He was considered, and then I went back to how rare it's been that Kirby has truly trusted the bell cow back. And I talked about that when we did like the predicting the leading rusher in the SEC for 2024, and how that kind of gave me pause with ETN as much as I loved ETN. But Frazier is considered to be the next man up in a lot of ways, and somebody that could absolutely explode if they're able to improve on that offensive line too.
Yeah, I think for me, it's all about circumstances and surroundings, right? You come into this year, you have the veteran quarterback, you have the receivers that people thought were good. They turned out to not be good. You look back at this SEC championship performance by our boy, Stunnigalocton. How did that go? Well, it was a lot of trickeration and ETN involvement. Now, I understand that was not the game plan. I understand that their starter got hurt and they weren't really, ready for that. But at the same time, when you have a quarterback without a ton of experience, you have a group of receivers that, you bring in the big name transfers, but I don't think that Mike Bobo at this point is going to hang his job on Gunnar Stockton. I think that he has always been a guy that when things kind of go sideways, he starts to trust his gut. We joked about like the pitches, the outside runs, the stuff that he gets good at. And I think that he is going to lock in a little similarly to what I talked about in Oregon and go, okay, what do I know this offense can do? We have this guy, Nate Frazier, who is a freak. He honestly was kind of underrated as a recruit, in my opinion. Like everybody says in the weight room, on the practice field, he pops. He sticks out. And so I think that to create a Georgia offense in short order that people can feel good about, this is the guy who you almost have to trust, because you don't want to go into the season and say, all right, we tried this with a veteran quarterback. It didn't work. Now we're going to take a less veteran quarterback who is a chill guy, and that's going to be the X factor here. We're going to bring in a couple of new receivers, but you can't overhaul a receiver room that quickly, even in the modern era. And so it's a lot easier for me to go, okay, yeah, we are just going to ride this running back. We are going to make him into, because remember, that was always my kind of criticism of the offense, is that ETN needed a guy like that. And Frazier was that guy to some degree, but I don't think they ever really figured out the 1-2 punch thing, because ETN was just a better running back. And so it was like, do we bring him on passes? Do we give him like the inside carries? How do we do it? There's not going to be, in my opinion, that amount of how do we use these guys coming forward? A guy like ETN, we saw they rode him in the SEC championship game. We saw they rode him in the postseason, and that was obviously a good move based on, obviously Notre Dame went the way it went, but I don't think it wasn't Trevor Etienne's fault. You know what I'm saying? So point being, I think that they saw, okay, this quarterback is a lot more effective when we don't try to open it up and Hail Mary it. He's going to need some type of a substance to base this whole thing off of. We have this back. We're going to start there at least, and then it may just never get turned over. Like, Yeah, I think that if Georgia had either Nick Chubb or Sony Michel last year, they would have wrote him. You know what I'm saying? It was just the fact they had those two guys at the same time. And it seems like we're actually at a weird talent deficit for Georgia where you only have a couple of freaks on the offense, and this is the guy that can make the most difference.
They need help on the offensive line.
Oh, yeah.
We don't usually say that about Georgia. They need help there. Because I thought, even though once ETN was healthy, I shouldn't say once he was healthy, but there were definitely moments SEC championship, and there were, I think, moments earlier in the year when he looked like he was doing a lot of the stuff after contact.
Yep.
And it wasn't necessarily these big gaping holes when he was at his best. It was him finishing off these runs. And so I think that with Frazier, nobody's going to be surprised if Georgia turns out another stud running back. I mean, to me, that's not really so much a question. Is how much does the offensive line improve? How much does he improve in the passing game? Because that's the area that I think Kirby would like to be able to see him take that next step and become a weapon out of the backfield. If you're going to be a running back competing for a Heisman Trophy, can you do so without the passing game involvement? Ashton Genty is able to do that because Ashton Genty is getting volume that is just second to none. I do wonder too about if teams are going to look at Ohio State and go, wait a minute, they had Travion Henderson coming back. They went out, they added Quinshon Judkins. They looked like an exceptional backfield down the stretch. How many of those teams will want to try and have that true 1-2 punch, play the long game? Will Georgia be one of those teams that you'd think with an embarrassment of riches, are they going to get these younger guys involved and, have a role with Frazier? But yeah, Frazier should be a very, very good player. When we do our who's going to lead the SEC in rushing debate, maybe we'll have to do it in draft form or something like that.
I'll tip my hand here. So.
Yeah, he's going to be a top candidate. There's no doubt about it. Do I go with another defensive? If I go with another defensive player here, I think I'm going to get some looks. Do I pander? Should I pander, Will, a little bit?
I think so.
All right, I'm a pander, and I'm going to take Cam Coleman.
Okay.
Give me the guy that finished the year on an absolute tear. I mean, was just a machine. I think there is a group of people, a lot of which might have crimson running through their veins. A lot of people who wrote off Cam Coleman after the slow start to his career. Some of that just figuring out how to play the position, line up outside against true draft eligible corners in this conference. Not an easy thing to do. It's also not easy to do when you got a shoulder injury and Peyton Thorne's your quarterback. So a lot of things probably working against him early in his career, but the way that he finished the season, he was fantastic. Last 3 games, he had 22 catches, 306 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns. Didn't drop a pass once the calendar turned to October. Coleman and Williams, these are the guys that are going to be synonymous with one another. I talked about the comp piece that I did on SaturdayDownSouth.com, shameless plug. Those two guys each finished with 8 touchdown grabs. No SEC true freshman wide receivers had more than that since 2012 Amari Cooper. I mean, these guys made big-time plays. Yeah, another elite true freshman receiver in this conference. And trust me, I know the history of Auburn receivers very, very well. We talked about that last offseason, and we talked about it because Cam Coleman balled out in the spring game. And I said, does everybody realize that Auburn hasn't had a first-team all-SEC receiver at season's end since 1994? 1994! Keandre Lambert-Smith probably should have been, in my opinion, but he ultimately doesn't end up getting that type of billing. So I understand that you got some things working against you, historically speaking. But Auburn finally had a top 40 passing offense, first time since 1997. That stat that I always love to bring up, that is dead. And it was dead in a year in which you had Peyton Thorne as your starting quarterback, maybe the worst quarterback room in the SEC. And they still were able to do that. So I think that the addition of Jackson Arnold is going to be really important, obviously, for what we think Cam Coleman is capable of. Some of the things that you feel like should be highlight reel type plays on a weekly basis should be on the table more often with Jackson Arnold as your signal caller. The addition of Eric Singleton coming over from Georgia Tech, one of the most important portal additions by any SEC team. He's going to step in to that Keandre Lambert-Smith role, be a veteran, take some of that pressure off of what we think Coleman should look like. So, yeah, projection, we're a little bit of a dart throw here, but I just think that guy has so much talent. And I know Auburn fans are giddy to see what he can do in year 2.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another guy, right? We're talking about narrative where it's like, oh, you turned around the situation. Where to your point, it's like, actually, this guy was awesome last year, and so was Lambert Smith, but everyone around him was so stupid that we all thought they were bad. If you weren't really locked into Auburn, which again, if you weren't either an Alabama fan or an Auburn fan, there was no reason to watch Auburn last year. As an Alabama fan, it was like, I'd love to watch more of this team. They make me feel better about myself.
He made a catch against Louisiana Monroe
Mm-hmm.
that was so unbelievably impressive if it had come against air. And
Yeah.
you have to remind yourself that this guy's still figuring out the position and whatnot. But the body control that you see out of him is not as far behind Ryan Williams as some people think. I'll say that. The catch that he made down the field against A&M, where it's a deep ball, and he kind of has to slow his stride a little bit, but he does this thing where he slows down his stride, and then he gets this burst of momentum as he's catching it, and he takes off and he separates from the A&M secondary. It's one of those plays that just leave you going, like, did he just, I have to go back and watch. He just made that look really, really easy. And that's a play that usually you're not getting yak yards out of, even though it was slightly underthrown. So yeah, I'm all in on Cam Coleman, I guess.
Yeah, and we talked about this the other day, but the funniest story about Auburn is that all the guys except for the quarterback lived up to the hype. That might be the only SEC team that you can say that for. Both of the receivers, like everybody was good on offense except for the most important guy who we all knew was not good. So it was like all you had to do was change this one little thing. And the second funny thing about Coleman is that he was exactly what we hoped and dreamed he would be, but he ended up as the third best freshman wide receiver last year because we had an embarrassment of riches at that position. Yeah. I mean, like the freshman All-American team was probably more competitive than the All-American team because it was like kind of the same guys and there was no legacy. So it's like, yeah, okay, Ryan Williams is a little better, Jeremiah Smith is a little bit better, but if we're talking narrative, I could definitely see there's like some great value there.
So you have one more pick.
Yes.
We've been way more all over the place. Mm-hmm. I felt like last year we were stealing picks from each other left and right. Mm-hmm. I feel like I have three different places that I could go with this last pick. I don't think you're going to pick any one of them. So you have last pick.
I'm going to go ahead and continue our tradition of taking a defensive player. And I'm going to tell you who I'm not going to take first, even though I think he's a better player. I'm not going to take Caleb Downs here. I think that Caleb Downs is too famous, like I've talked about. It seems like great value to Caleb Downs here, but with the fact of they already got a receiver that's famous, let alone a quarterback, there's just no shot. They're sending three guys to the Heisman, and that's what it would be with Caleb Downs. So even though I think Caleb Downs is, what are you going to say?
I had him 8th on my board.
Yep.
Very similar logic. Very similar. Like they just had the number one scoring defense in the country. He was awesome. He was great for the national champs, the eventual national champs. Mm-hmm. That guy did so many things this year. Did we ever hear anything Caleb Downs Heisman related?
No. It felt like he was like the fourth most important player on their defense. Or to your point, he was like returning kicks and doing all kinds of stuff. The coverage just moved away from him.
The only thing to keep in mind, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if I'm doing a dart throw, something like that, and I'm trying to envision what the path would look like. Mm-hmm. Ryan Day just won a national championship. He just got himself a fat new contract. Mm-hmm. Real fat. PH fat, as the kids say.
Yeah.
He's got more grace than ever. Unlike last year, when we heard the preseason conversation, is he going to play running back? Is he going to play offense, do a little Charles Woodson, Ryan Day trying to stick it to Michigan? He could actually do that now and kind of get away with it.
Yeah.
Especially now that they have some of the a little bit more depth questions at running back now. They get the transfer in from West Virginia, and they're looking like they're going to be a different running game identity. We can say that. I'm just saying, keep that possibility open. But I wasn't going to take him with my last pick for the reasons that you outlined. He's already ridiculously famous. Teams aren't going to even throw at him. So I don't know if he's going to be able to have what did Charles Woodson have, like 7 interceptions during that Heisman season? Mm-hmm. I think the ship has kind of sailed for him to be able to take home that award.
It's a guy that is going to hit the NFL. He's going to be awesome. And we're going to go, yep. I don't know why this guy was not more famous in college. Yep. Because you got to be Jabril Peppers. You got to be like, have some weird thing to you that everybody's interested by. Anyway, so here is going to be kind of a dark throw, not that weird, but Dylan Stewart. He's going to be my defensive player here, and I'll tell you why for a couple of reasons. I don't believe in Shula as the offensive coordinator, so I'm not even really worried about having too many offensive guys competing with him. But I do know that Beamer is maybe the best salesperson in college football. And let me tell you what, if Bieber knew that he could wear a burlap sack on the sidelines to get Dylan Stewart to the Heisman, he would do it. Like, hey, he took all my sacks. He's the sack man. I'm the sack man. I love Bieber, and I want him to run a real Heisman campaign. And I think that Dylan Stewart, given that he is a guy that has been developed, he is a guy that is the proof of concept for what this team could be. And I think that Sellers is that too. We can't draft him, right? So do I think that Sellers is going to take shine away from Dylan Stewart? I don't at this point. He might take another adjustment year to be as good as a Heisman finalist quarterback could be. But Dylan Stewart, I could feel like I could call defense to get that guy 7 sacks. Like, I feel like if you just tell him to run straight like Bobby Boucher, he would do it. He looks awesome. He's a freak. He's at a smaller school. Actually, we're getting to a point where we're kind of getting the hipster vote in, or if you look at last year, we're having like the off the beaten path guys. They can often do better, especially if they're not in typical situations. So let's say South Carolina wins 9-10 games last year. They get like an attaboy Heisman guy. I think it's going to be Dylan Stewart.
And not Lenore Sellers?
Nope.
I had Stewart 10th on my board.
Mm-hmm.
I'm having a tough time setting expectations for him, not just for this discussion, but just overall.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of that is because his surroundings are going to be very different.
Yep.
Very, very different. You have all of these guys on that defensive line, Kyle Kennard, TJ Sanders, you're losing Tonka Hemingway, who was there forever.
Mm-hmm.
All these guys are off to the NFL. And what does it look like now with double teams, triple teams? We saw Dylan Stewart handle the triple team against Kentucky and still somehow get to the quarterback and like, how old is this kid? This is his second. What's he doing? Dylan Stewart's awesome. And when I do preseason top 10 players in the SEC, like he's going to be on all those lists, and as he should be. What's going to be interesting to see with him is if his hurries continue, if he's still being able to hurry the quarterback, because I do think you're looking at a guy who could see sacks not necessarily skyrocket, TFLs not necessarily skyrocket. Maybe his production plateaus or it stays kind of similar, but he had 34 hurries last year, which was 11th among FBS edge rushers. That's really, really good.
Mm-hmm. And he gets to hurry just by putting his arms up, honestly. He's already at the quarterback when he does that.
Yeah. And like that, everybody talked about the play that he made against Old Dominion, the bend that he showed. That's the NFL thing that guys like to throw around is look at the bend that this guy already has at this stage of his career. But is he going to consistently win those battles, and will he be knocked for doing so? Because the pass rush win rate is something that gets talked about a lot. And just for a little context, so he was at 16.6% on that. PFF had him for that. Mm-hmm. James Pierce Jr. this past year, everybody's kind of like, where'd the production go? Why aren't you putting up 15, 20 sacks this year? Why are there games where it feels like you're kind of invisible? He had a 23% win rate, and that was one of the best in the country. You guys still I think pre-NFL draft, or maybe it was sophomore year. Yeah, it must have been sophomore year Nick Bosa, because his pre-draft season wasn't much of one. He gets hurt in September. Mm-hmm. But I think his pass rush win rate was something like 24, 25%. And that was a really big deal for the way that they used him. And it just showed how dominant he was. Stewart's a fantastic player and someone that South Carolina is super fortunate to have. I wonder if the tail off of Jadeveon Clowney's career near the end has perhaps lowered expectations in a weird way for Dylan Stewart, and seeing him do awesome things as a sophomore will all of a sudden make South Carolina fans extremely giddy, although Clowney was still ridiculously good as a sophomore himself.
That's actually pretty funny, where it's like, actually, the most physically imposing South Carolina defensive end, you'll never be that, even though you're 6'6", which is pretty funny there. Yeah, and I think too, Clayton White, the South Carolina defensive coordinator, is a guy that we don't talk about enough. This is one of the few coordinators that are returning. And I think too, again, I want to see Beer run Heisman campaign, because you're right in that you could even look at Jared Verse, who kind of technically had a down year in his last year, but it was because he was eating up blocks. He gets the NFL immediately is impactful. Maybe it's one of those situations. But I don't put it past Bieber to kind of cheese this a little bit. Have a couple of guys in his gap to where he gets a free rush more than he should. Put him in maybe in the goal line for a carry here or there. Because here's the deal. At least you got to be proud of me that I didn't take Nick Harbor here. All right. I learned from my mistakes. Okay. Because I know that guy is not going to be there at least. But I think that if they're going to have a guy they're going to show off, I think it would be one of those two guys outside of Sellers, like we talked about. And so I think that maybe we get into, because you talked about he got on the scene early, was probably a little bit underrated as a recruit, despite being a pretty good recruit. And I'm talking about first game of his career, it was wow. And so point being, I think that if he starts off hot like that, Beamer is the type of coach who would play into that. And I think that's a big deal because most college football coaches, even in this age, are wired to be like, this is a team game. This is individual. I'm going to be Brian Kelly and run Josh Williams 30 times a game because he's a senior. Whereas like Beamer is like, dog, we're going to run Dylan Sampson face jerseys Saturday.
Dylan Stewart.
Sorry, you're right. Yeah. Dylan Stewart. Yeah.
The worst case scenario for South Carolina fans, and I probably shouldn't even say this. South Carolina fans, if you don't want to have your mind go to dark places, just skip this part. The worst.
They've already been there. That's the joke. That's the thing. You can't get worse than South Carolina's been. They're like Bane.
This scenario, Dylan Stewart has a year in which he's seeing double and triple teams every week, and he's like, "What am I doing?" The defense regresses, and pre-draft season, he's like, "Get me to a place that's got dudes all over that defensive line, and I can get one-on-one matchups, and I can pick my landing spot. I can name my price, maybe play for a title." Not quite Quinshon Judkins, but that would be the fear that something like that could come about. And they were already dealing with, could he leave at the end of his true freshman season? That's the world that we live in. So I don't mean to just throw out conspiracy theories or try and dog a program that has not had a lot of guys like this coming back in recent memory. I hope for the sake of South Carolina fans, this guy finishes his career there and does really, really awesome things. But that's at least going to be out there with him. And I guess that's got nothing to do with whether or not he's, in the conversation for Heisman Trophy.
I know that. I don't know, man. I think South Carolina has actually done a surprisingly good job of keeping their guys. If you think about it, they lost Wells, but what did he do? They're glad they lost Wells at the end of the day because he didn't bring them anything. Leggett they developed. I can kind of go up and down the roster and be like, it's like a lot historically, right? When you've been in a little bit of a flex post Steve Spurrier, the way they have been, often guys get poached. There's something about South Carolina where those guys will kind of stay. And we kind of dealt with that during the bowl game as every team does. But I think that whatever it is, they announced, that was the one I was talking about. They had the extended graphic. I was like, oh, they kept him and everything coming out of this year. And that's just going to be standard going forward. Every good player is going to have a little contract extension. But point being, I think that Beamer has done enough. And if you buy into Beamer and that year happens last year, it's better than you even expected in your heart of hearts. So I think they're going to, again, he's got his defensive coordinator coming back. He's got the coach that recruited him. And I think it's a mutual, we want you to get to New York too.
I got to end this. I think I'm going to go different than what I originally anticipated.
Okay.
I was originally going to go with TJ Parker, the Clemson defensive end.
Yep.
Who Clemson fans are hoping that Tom Allen does to him what he did to Abdul Carter.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot to like there. And I thought about bringing that up just because, while Heisman's are definitely not won in September, if he gets to a certain Garrett Nussmeier a million times in the season opener, that would be your Zachariah Branch pick.
Suddenly the tackles are bad and the interior's good. What's happened here?
Exactly.
We've given up 6 sacks. I missed my tackles.
I could look up at a season opener and see TJ Parker dominating that LSU offensive line in a post Will Campbell, Emory Jones world and think to myself, Connor, you should have listened to yourself. You should have taken him in the non-quarterback Heisman draft. I'm going to go with a guy who was a big what if of the postseason.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Jordan Tyson. Jordan Tyson, the Arizona State receiver, who gets hurt and is unavailable for the postseason after he and Sam Leavitt were just on a tear.
Yep.
I mean, he was easily one of the best receivers in college football last year. If he's active for Arizona State in the playoff, do they beat Texas and reach the semifinals? I think it's at least a fair question to ask. I'm not saying definitively that it happens, but given how close that game was at different points, and if they could have early on.
Well, I think if he's healthy, they don't trust Scatterbo as much as they did, and statistically that made no sense, but in reality it did. So I'd make the opposite case, which is that they felt like all they had was Scatterbo, and they kept trusting him, and he kept coming through.
Yeah, it definitely worked on the stretch. Maybe they don't fall behind as much early on. They're able to close out some of those drives early in the game when it felt like they were living in Texas territory. But what's not really debatable, in my opinion, is that he was just phenomenal once Sam Leavitt was established as a starter. His final 8 games of the season, 61 catches, 892 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns. Now he's healthy. Sam Leavitt's back. They already showed in that offense that Kenny Dillingham runs that they could yield a non-quarterback Heisman candidate in Scatterbo, who was off to the NFL. They built their offense around him once they realized what they had in him. they're going to have a new offensive identity, and it could very well be built around Jordan Tyson. And here's a little media narrative that could be thrown out there. If Jordan Tyson has, 1,700 yards, something like that, pre-Heisman, and is looking like he's a big reason why Arizona State's going to repeat in the Big 12 or something like that. He started his career at Colorado. He was actually really solid as a true freshman. And I went back and I was looking at, there was a piece in the Denver Post about how Jordan Tyson's kind of the key to Colorado's future, not Deion Sanders, which I was like, whoa, that's quite
Deion read that and kicked him off the team. He was like, hey, listen, buddy, it's me, not you.
So post-spring, when all those dudes went off in the spring game and everybody was watching that Colorado spring game, he was one of those guys that hit the portal right after that. So make of that what you will. Some will make of that Deion didn't think he was good enough to play at Colorado, and now he's going to win the Heisman the year after Travis Hunter. Maybe not. Just the anti-Deion crowd would certainly like to see Jordan Tyson have that type of a year, because he was just phenomenal down the stretch. In November, he had 119 more receiving yards than any other FBS player. And that was right before he got hurt. And he also tied Hunter and Coleman for most November receiving touchdowns among core 4 players. He's great. Kind of surprised he didn't go off to the NFL, because he was technically draft eligible. Maybe the injury played a part in that, but he should be in for a really, really big year for Arizona State.
Yeah, no, I'm right there. I think that like Arizona State does appear to be real. In the Big 12, I mean, the Big 12 has fully just captured the Pac-12 after dark, but it's like all day. Like it's like every single day, all the time. Oh, are we in Utah with covered wagons? Oh, are we at Arizona State at the sickest party you've ever seen? It's all chaos. Is it, whatever. So yeah, I think that, it's hard to obviously predict that conference, but I would like to choose their coach pretty much any time I could, at least as, maybe like, is he for sure the best coach in the Big 12? I'm not sure, because it's such a short tenure, but as of right now, feels pretty like Dillingham feels like the guy. So I kind of trust that guy, and he's almost gotten to like Lane Kiffin status, where it's like, okay, year 1, I had a receiver. Year 2, I had a running back. Year 3, I had a mobile quarterback. They're all going to win SEC Player of the Year. That's like my favorite Lane Kiffin thing that nobody talks about, where he just like looked at his dudes and he was like, and you're the best player this year. We're going to change the offense. Like, that was actually mastermind stuff. But that's might be the point that Dillingham's at right now, where he's like, and last year we had Scottaboo, right? So we ran the ball. And now we have these 2 guys. So we throw the ball. I like it. I
can see that happening. Kyle Whittingham might have a better argument to be considered a better coach in the Big 12, but Dillingham is climbing up whatever sort of ranking he was at last year. That's for sure.
A lot of hams, no turkey.
No turkeys. Okay, so our final rosters. Will, you have Jeremiah Love, Ryan Williams, Nick Singleton, Nate Frazier, Dylan Stewart. I have Jeremiah Smith, Desmond Reed, Colin Simmons, Cam Coleman, Jordan Tyson. You gonna win the vote?
I hope so, man. I did last year though, so that's the thing. That might be a harbinger of defeat.
You got 3 SEC players on this list. I only have 2. Could that be the difference? We will see. I might have picked Cam Coleman in part because you got Ryan Williams. That might have been a little bit too much of a pander pick. He was on my board. I didn't go totally rogue on that one, but I'm admitting to the people there was a bit of strategy here. I'd like to win the vote and win it overall, even though I believe all those things.
I tell you what, that leading rusher conversation, which I hope we will pause until we get the spring window figured out, but that leading rusher conversation in the SEC is going to be so fascinating.
It really will be. Yeah, we might have to wait post-spring to do something like that. Yeah, we can't. Might even have to wait post-fall camp to do something like that.
Week 0. I may have an idea of what's going to happen here.
I felt so bad after that, man. I might just not say anything good about CJ Baxter all offseason, just so that guy can have a clean bill of health.
But he's on like the Alvin Kamara track now, where it's like, well, actually, having fewer carries might be good for your overall situation. So who knows?
Yeah, spin zone. I like it. All right. That is the draft. We're going to, like I said, we're going to put the vote out on the Saturday Down South Twitter account at the SDS Pod. I'll keep the poll up for like a week or something like that, depending. I know it's the off season. Sometimes people listen to this stuff a little bit more intermittingly, so I will leave that up. Will, do we have the same lad of the week?
You told me yours. No, but they're related.
Want me to start?
Yeah.
All right. Jalen Hurts is the obvious one. It's one of the best football stories of the last decade. And look, I pointed out a couple years ago how sick I was of people saying everyone doubted us, blah blah blah. The Travis Kelsey thing post game. It's like,
I wait. Yes.
I was like, I hate that.
Yeah, Jason Kelsey, but yes.
No, wasn't no. Travis Kelsey said it.
Oh, I'm sorry. They both said that after a Super Bowl. Continue. Okay. My bad.
Maybe it's just the Kelsey thing.
Yeah, maybe that's their family motto.
Yeah, the Kelseys, they got it really rough these days. So, like, look, I get kind of sick of that.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to always play into that. And I know that we in the media sometimes we lay it on thick with some of this stuff. And, this guy battled this amount of adversity, that amount of adversity. I think the Jalen Hurts arc, whatever you want to call it, the redemption arc, it is truly Hollywood stuff. It is. And I have so many different memories of thinking, well, it's good that he's at least going to have that, And I could go back to the 2018 SEC championship. Marler and I were there, and Marler was just as happy as I think I've ever seen him be as an Alabama fan. I've seen him after national championships. And he was on cloud nine because of what Hurts came in and did in relief of Tua, a game in which Tua cost himself the Heisman that year. And Jalen Hurts steps in, saves the day. Georgia fans, sorry, had to revisit that. But I remembered thinking that day, like, this might be the best moment of Jalen Hurts' football career. I don't know what's going to happen after this. I would assume he's going to go transfer somewhere next year. But look at the player that guy became this year. He's such a better passer. Like, that guy's going to have a chance to at least make it on an NFL roster and play quarterback. Like, good for him. Good for him. And it's just kept getting better. It's just kept getting better. And you go back to so many different moments, even when he got to the NFL, Senior Bowl, as he's doing the pre-draft stuff, he gets asked if he's going to stay at quarterback. Simone Eli had that video and reposted it. And you're reminded of how many different times in his career that he's been scrutinized. Eagles fans, a lot of them thought that they wasted a second-round pick on him when they had Carson Wentz. Like, what are they doing? And for him to kind of be this guy who once upon a time was, yes, benched at halftime of the national championship, I think is just remarkable. And it speaks to what a guy can do if he really feels like the entire world is working against him. And I think at different points, Jalen Hurts has really had a strong argument in that. And, I remember when Matt Hayes had the viral story for Bleacher Report. And if you follow college football closely, you know where I'm getting at with this. But he talked to his dad in Texas that summer going into the 2018 season. It's post 2nd and 26. And we're talking about one of the most competitive quarterback battles of all time. I think all along, all of us kind of felt like Tua was going to win it. And, his dad said, you effed up. You effed up. You left the door open. And now you got to go dig yourself out of this hole. It's a quote that has stayed with me for so long because that guy had his own family telling him, you messed up, man. It's up to you to figure this out from here. You went to Alabama knowing that could happen at any given point. And so instead of us feeling like we need to do this thing where we go back and we like criticize Alabama for how they handled Jalen Hurts, to me, I think they took an incredibly difficult situation and they got the most of it. They won that title, by the way, in case you forgot. And then the guy ends up being one of the best players in the NFL right now. Like you can't outplay Pat Mahomes in 2 Super Bowls and not be considered one of the best players in the NFL. And as recently as September, people were wondering if this guy's going to keep his starting job, if he's going to be worth that contract. So I have all the respect in the world for Jalen Hurts. And you know what, man, like I used to make the joke all the time that I would one day tell my grandkids, I saw Tua Tagovailoa's first career start in college. And that was when we finally found out that game in Orlando against Louisville was when this quarterback battle was finally decided or whatever you want to call it. I tell my grandkids.
So quit asking.
Like I would tell my, the Maria Taylor quote, of course.
Yeah.
Who could forget that? And now I'm looking at this going, buddy, Jalen Hurts is the guy I'm telling my daughter about. And, every kid should know about what that guy has been through. And how many times he's been, second place. When is this ever going to be my time? And I'm blown away. Like I watched the post game stuff because I wanted to see Jalen Hurts happy. I watched that interview with Erin Andrews, and she brings up how Jalen, like you had on your background on your phone as your screensaver the confetti falling on the Chiefs a couple of years ago. I thought she was talking about 7 years ago when he did that, because that was his background on his phone when they lost to Clemson when he was a true freshman, and that made waves when he had that as his background throughout that entire.
He invented the Stephon Diggs. Look at this.
Yeah, seriously. But like that to me, I can't say enough good things about Jalen Hurts. I love that dude. I'll continue to root for that guy, even though I was dead wrong about him. I thought he was going to quit in the middle of the 2018 season, preserve a year of eligibility, and find a new home. And he just has never quit at any point. And it's just the model of what you would hope an NFL player would become.
Yeah, I love Jalen Hurts so much. I think from the first time I heard him talk, seeing the weight room stuff, learned about, his dad, being a coach and all that, his first career, I think it was his first career touch was a fumble. I know it was on his first drive.
Yeah, the USC game. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what he was playing against, like Blake Barnett and all that stuff. And it just feels like he is actually the guy that, like, remember like when Trevor Lawrence was like, oh, things haven't actually been that hard for me. And like we hear every quarterback talk about how like, oh, well, everybody was against me. It's like, no, they weren't. Everyone was kind of against Jalen Hurts, and everyone kind of has been for his whole career. And I'm not even going to say it's a race thing. I'm just going to be honest with you. I think that he's such a physical freak, and I think that at times he's looked limited as a passer. And honestly, the coaches that couldn't figure him out, especially in my opinion at Alabama, guys like Dable, I mean, I think that they just didn't get it. I think that he is a unique player. I think that when it comes to being able to be the maestro of a talented team, he is not turnover prone. He takes care of the football. He moves the pile. He gets clutch like third downs. He can run the ball with the way that game plan was. I mean, defensively, oh my goodness, but offensively, the way that the Chiefs bottled up Saquon and the Eagles just didn't care. It was so crazy. Matter. It was like, okay, well, we know both of our receivers, shout out Smitty, both of our receivers, and AJ Brown, another SEC guy, I forget about that, but two SEC guys, like they were just winning every matchup one-on-one. And it was like, well, the Chiefs are going to keep sending the Spags pressure, but Jalen Hurts is going to make these throws, and AJ Brown is going to be putting people in the dirt. And Smitty became the first Alabama player to ever score in a Super Bowl. Super cool.
Fifth player ever to win a national title, win a Heisman Trophy, and win a Super Bowl.
Yeah. So point being, I've always loved Jalen Hurts. I'm not going to go into the Tua stuff, but I've just always thought he was better than Tua. That's just my opinion, and I don't think I'm wrong. And
I still think Bama was perfectly fine to bring in Tua.
Bring him in, do whatever. Like I think in that championship game, obviously it worked out. I just think that the way that Jalen was kind of villainized, even though he has been a consummate, he is the only quarterback that I will compare to Joe Burrow, and I'll tell you why. They both have dads that are coaches, and they both psychopathically get better. Like if they struggle, they sit in the lab until they're just better. And that's so hard to find. Everybody gives the quote, but like those two guys are true sickos to where like if they struggle one offseason or if they can't make a throw or they can't make a play, you just know they're in some little VHS box with their dads getting yelled at.
I think that guy is just wired very differently.
Mm-hmm.
He is. It's 26 still, too. Isn't that weird? I think some of these guys, man, we're talking about Tyler Shuck's like 25 years old going out to the NFL. Jalen Hurts is 26, and he's had an entire lifetime of football that we've been dissecting forever. And for that guy to finally win one, it just felt very justified, and was happy to see him happy.
Yes, absolutely. Boy, howdy, are our lads of the week as similar as they can be, and I'm going to prove that here. I was going to start with the Jason Kelsey quote about being underdogs. I like his better because he's dressed in a mummer's fit. You can imagine the one he's giving the speech. And he said, hungry dogs run faster. And he started talking about desperation and how the Eagles are led by this offensive line and everything. And basically, the Eagles were doubted, right? They were. I mean, their offense, their defense, everybody from like Jalen Carter down to, so I'm going to mention a couple of guys here. Sirianni wore like a college football style rivalry shirt, and people thought he was a clown, despite the fact that he's been to 2 Super Bowls now and is now tied the Philadelphia Eagles for the most wins in franchise history with like I mean, not even Andy Reid, right? Like that was kind of the one-off year with Foles. And so this has felt sustainable from the jump. I think people have not understood what this Eagles team is. It's fundamentally a team built from the trenches and through leadership. This is a dynasty, in my opinion. Kind of hard to think that way, but when you think about Lane Johnson still being there, when you think about the interior of that offensive line, even though it doesn't feature Kelsey anymore, this is a fundamentally, like the things that it was based around are very similar to 2017. So I think now you have 3 Super Bowl appearances, 2 wins. That to me is a dynasty, certainly in their division. You go through head coaches, but you technically even go through quarterbacks. Another guy I'm going to mention here, Zach Bond. Man, are the Saints stupid for letting that guy go. And man, we should have known that Dennis Allen was not him whenever that guy took his first snaps as a Philadelphia Eagle, because I liked him a lot coming out of Wisconsin. Not that I thought he was some genius or anything, but the way that we gave up on him was so stupid. The way that he immediately became a useful player for them. We could talk about the same thing with all the defensive guys, some of the Georgia guys that were dumped on. And I think finally, and I've already talked about him, Saquon Barkley, the way that he was cast to the side, people said you shouldn't pay a running back. Yeah, you should. When it's Saquon Barkley, yeah, you freaking should. All right. Because at the end of the day, if you have a guy that until the Super Bowl, which again, if you're going to send 8 guys in every play, okay, you win. All right. How's that going for you, Chiefs? But up until the Super Bowl, we talked about it, carrying them through the snow, looking so sick. And I think that each and every one of those guys legitimately have a story of, we were doubted. Jalen Hurts is another one. You brought him up, so we're not going to go into him anymore. But literally, that's what the Eagles have done so well, is get guy Jalen Carter, another guy. And again, that was his fault. I'm not going to go ahead and say everything's equal. Jalen Hurts worked his butt off or whatever. Carter obviously has some moments he would like to take back, but this is not an I gotcha thing. It's the guy worked his butt off to get here. Our boy Jordan Davis, guy everybody said he was fat, just like Luka Doncic. And so you go up and down this roster and you got a bunch of guys that are on second and third chances. And it's crazy that the Eagles are just like, oh, okay, cool. You come over here then. Everyone hates you. Cool. They hate us too. And that goes back to the Jason Kelly quote. We're from Philly, bleeping Philly. No one likes us. We don't care. And that's my mentality all the time. So this has just been such a fun team to root for.
It was, let's just say it felt like America's team for a night.
Yeah.
Kind of did, Who would ever think Eagles, America's team? But yeah, I thought they were likable. I thought they were really, really likable. All the different Georgia connections there, which I talked about on the last pod. It made for a team that I think everybody looked at and went, well, that is extremely talented. And that was the clear takeaways. That was the most talented. It was the best team in the NFL throughout the entire season. And to win like that, though, was just, an unbelievable statement. Look, one day, maybe one of our franchises will get back to the Super Bowl. We'll have to instead settle for rooting for likable teams once they get there.
Sure.
Yeah. Who knows? We'll see. We both got new coaches, though. New life. Yeah. We're good. Everything will work itself out.
Kellen Moore, your line of the week. Please come to New Orleans.
Please, seriously. He's got time now. He's not doing anything anymore. Once he's not hungover, he'll come to New Orleans.
He's already in town. He doesn't have to get on a plane.
Yeah, good point.
Let's just offer him the job. What are we doing?
Yeah. Oh, his breath reeks of alcohol.
Oh no, you'll fit right in.
Yeah, exactly. All right. If you haven't, leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at Sat Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.